Hello and welcome to the British Steam Locomotive podcast show series. Yes, I'm back, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls of all ages. Today, I decided to do another famous steam locomotive, which all of you know, they're all about prestige, glamour, and speed. Yes, the famous Gresley A4 Pacific class. Sit back and enjoy. The London and North Eastern Railway's chief mechanical engineer was Sir Nigel Gresley. His first designed Pacific locomotives were the Gresley A3s. One of them survives today as the world-famous steam locomotive, Flying Scotsman. But ever since Flying Scotsman broke 100 in 1934 with the dynamometer car, Sir Nigel Gresley designed a new locomotive, and that of which is, of course, the world's fastest steam locomotive in the world. The class is the world's fastest steam locomotive, known as the A4 class Pacifics, designed and built at Doncaster. 35 of them were built between 1935 and 1938. And of course, the casing, the streamlining, was very unique. Most of it was Art Deco. To artists who doesn't like the streamlining, so the side valances were removed to allow access to the working parts. I mean, look at the locomotive, it's fantastic! I mean, the side valances over the wheels make it look very fast, and the long swooping curves and the liveries, the two-tone silver, garter blue, apple green, BR blue, and Brunswick green, whatever you like. The A4s are stunning locomotives. It's not just the casing, it's a work of art. The cab was very unique too. Padded bucket seats, controls you could reach. The fireman had enough room to swing his shovel and sit on the bucket seat to sight signals. And they consumed less coal and water than the Kings and the Royal Scots and the other locomotives that you can name. And of course, the Cotsmouth door, which opens the smoke box. If you want access to it, you have to use a special handle to get in. And the idea came from a dust cart. You wouldn't believe it by looking at it, would you? Sounds pretty good too, which is the chime whistle, the Crosby tri-note chime whistle. They were really sound the part, not just the looks and speed, it also sounds the part. The class pioneer number 2509 Silver Link went from drawing to completion in 74 days. To start the Silver Jubilee service between King's Cross and Newcastle, which was reduced from 7 hours 6 minutes to just 4 hours. And all named after British birds. Silver engines to start with. There's Silver Link, Quicksilver, Silver King, and Silver Fox. Then most of the A4s were named after British birds. And since British birds began to diminish, they decided to name them after countries of the British Empire. But a couple of them did have their names remained, like number 4468, Mallard. Her name stuck, even though she was named after a duck, but she also did a brake test train between Grantham and Peterborough on the 3rd of July 1938. She picked up speed heading up the Stoke Bank. Driver Joe Duddington and fireman Tommy Bray were a tough team. They made Mallard go 126 miles an hour. Originally, it was 125 that the dynamometer car read out, but they had to specifically, technically interpreted to work it all out and balance out the various factors. So it was finally worked out that Mallard reached 126 miles an hour. And the record still stands to this very day. In 2013, the anniversary was celebrated, the Mallard 75th anniversary. was celebrated after the speed record. Then in May 1959, the sister locomotive, Sir Nigel Gresley, broke 112 miles an hour down Stoke Bank in Lincolnshire, with driver Bill Hill at the helm. Sir Nigel Gresley passed away in the 1940s after the war. Or was it before the war? Or was it during the war? I don't know. Sir Nigel Gresley was the greatest designer ever built. The greatest designer who ever lived, sorry. He built the famous locomotives that we see today. The Gresley A3s, the A4s, the N2 tank engines, and the V2s. And plus the Gresley Mogul class, the K4 Mogul. K4 Mogul, the great Marquis that survives today. More on that later. More on that on the later podcast show. The A4s are unique. Very well set out, but they did have problems. While Mallard was achieving the record, the big end bearing on the centre conrod had melted. Just goes to show that Mallard can prove how things can go wrong. Valve gear had problems too, and also, I don't know what it is, but sometimes the A4s have problems, and sometimes they suffer from poor coal. The depression behind the chimney prevents smoke from blocking the driver's view, which was excellent, created by accident on the plasticine model. It came as a thumbprint that designed it. Very unique, isn't it? Then also, the double Carlchap exhaust proved that Mallard can really go fast. They had single chimneys to start with, but then rebuilt two specific double chimneys to help improve the drafting, to burn through a thinner fire or a thick fire. You don't know what you're getting at, do you? If you're burning through a thin fire, it's the length of the fire that gives you your heat. If it's a thicker fire, it's the depth of the fire that gives you your heat. If you ask any other locomotive man, they would tell you the same thing. But let's get back to the A4s. The next problem was the chime whistle. Replica whistles were made, but some of the whistles were mistaken for air raid sirens, so some of them were scrapped, destroyed, and replica chime whistles were made after the war. Well, made during the war for the engines. And, well, these engines sound perfectly. Now they don't sound identical. And some of the chime whistles survive today, most of them being on Britannias, steamrollers and steam traction engines, and most chime whistles are fitted to the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch locomotives, like Hurricane has a A4 chrome chime whistle. The A4s are stunning as well as fast, capable of reaching 100 miles an hour. And, well, they weren't all so lucky when the end of steam came in 1966. King's Cross Shed closed in 1963, and Mallard worked rail tours for Stevenson Locomotive Society crews. She was always based at Top Shed, and then, when it closed, Mallard was preserved by the British Transport Museum in Clapham, where she worked several rail tours ever since, in British Railways Brunswick Green. She had a corridor tender, but then she was fitted with the tender that she was originally had when she did the run. Six A4s have survived the cutter's torch. And to this day, two of them, Dwight D. Eisenhower and Dominion of Canada, are across the Atlantic at the moment, back in their museums. Now, four of them are here in Britain. and they become stars in their own right. Even though before 1966, a couple of them did receive one last hurrah to work the 3-hour express trains between Glasgow and Aberdeen. And plus also, the A4s, had, what was the word I'm thinking of? Ah, yes. 6 of them survive today. 2 of them across the Atlantic, and others became stars in their own right. Take this one, for example. Number 6007, Sir Nigel Gresley, was withdrawn in 1966, brought by in the same year which became the A4 Locomotive Society. She was overhauled at Crewe Works upon purchase, and she became a mainline favourite and the reliable performers since the early 1970s and 80s. But number 7 isn't the only one in constant mainline appearances. Upon withdrawn, Union of South Africa was purchased by John Cameron, a farmer from Scotland that became the head of ScotRail and the director of South West Trains. And besides overhauls and also the private railway jaunt, Union of South Africa has hardly been off the main line, working many rail tours on the Settle and Carlisle line, and mostly working up in Scotland. Now that the Borders Railway is open, she has a railway to run on. But also she has other rail tours that go with DB or West Coast. Then there's the other one to be withdrawn. Bittern lived out most of her preservation life without even running. Restored in 2007 and air braked. Well, all 3 of them are air braked. Mallard returned to steam in the 1980s, and she steamed out everywhere she travels. But Bittern, her sister, restored in 2007, was gaining a reputation for posing as long-lost members of the class, including the Pioneer, Silver Link, and also Dominion of New Zealand in 1930s Garter Blue. She'd been in Brunswick Green for a while, but Bittern has now lived in glamorous Garter Blue. Looks nice too. In 2013, she reached 90 miles an hour, and she became the first ever locomotive to exceed to 90 above the current speed of 75 miles an hour. If you ask Richard Corso or anyone else who knows these A4s well and truly well, they would tell you that Bittern is a good engine to run with. The number of survivors: 6 A4s in preservation. Mallard, of course, was withdrawn from service in 1986. Well, not in 1986, 1988 she was withdrawn from service and put back on display. Her boiler ticket ran out. She returned to steam in 1986 and worked for a few years. It is sad, really. She deserves her place out on the main line. Surely she does. But that won't be till the foreseeable future, I'm afraid. Hope you've all enjoyed my comeback to YouTube and the British Steam Locomotive podcast show. And I hope you guys are enjoying yourselves seeing trains wherever you go. That's all from me. Bye for now.